support group for former cult members in the New York, New Jersey area for 25 years. They have helped untold numbers of former cult members, but I want you to know that their helping skills are not limited to that area. I had a friend a number of years ago, an African-American woman who lived in that area who had some personal issues, but the nature of her professional relationship was such that she didn't feel she could go to professionals in that community. And so I called Lorna and Bill, and she drove several hours from where she lived to spend some time with them on several occasions, and she told me afterwards that they were incredibly helpful and really helped her get on with her career. Please welcome the shy and retiring William Goldberg.
I'm going to speak to you about the support group that Lorna and I run and put it into some historical perspective. We do have about 28 years of experience running this group, and obviously there have been many profound changes in society that have really been reflected in the group, and that's what I want to talk about. I'm going to begin with the 1960s before we began the group, because this set the tone for the early years of the group. 1960s, we all know, was a time of idealism. It's a time when JFK said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." And nobody laughed. It was a time when the Beatles sang happy, fun songs, "I Want to Hold Your Hand," and songs like that. At that time, we had tried to get Lorna's brother out of the Unification Church, and it failed. And Lorna and I wanted to do something to help, and since we're both social workers, we felt that the way we could help would be to begin a support group. At that time, it was only the second support group in the country. Margaret Singer had the first in San Francisco. People in our group at the beginning were young and idealistic, from groups like the Unification Church. In the cult, they sang inspiring idealistic songs like The Impossible Dream. We had several from the Divine Light Mission, the followers of the teenage guru Maharaji. It was a time then of the giggling guru, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. The average age of our group was 18 to 22, average age of the members. Now, since I'm in Atlanta for each of my periods here, I tried to find a quote that would be pertinent to this particular city. And my first one that summarizes this time was from the mouth of Scarlett O'Hara herself. When the menfolk talked about the gathering war clouds and what was in the future, and Scarlett said, "Fiddle-dee-dee." Now going to fast forward a bit to the late 70s. This was a time of disillusionment. My presidential quote from this era was from Richard Nixon, who said, "I am not a crook." Maharaji developed an ulcer, and the Beatles were so into TM at this time that actually voice doubles were used on the animated film Yellow Submarine. Wow. Because they didn't have the time to attend to their business. In the group, we saw a resurgence of pseudoscientific groups that were called the New Age. There was a real waning of idealism, which symbolically culminated in 1980 with the death of John Lennon. The trend then was a pulling inward. The idealism had failed. America started looking inward, and so did the people in our group. New York Magazine called the 80s the Me Decade. We saw in society large group trainings were beginning. Jack Clark, one of the founders of AFF, said that in these group trainings, the medium was the massage. This decade was characterized for me by a quote from our son Ben. Lorna and I and Ben had volunteered at our local library in their book drive over the weekend. And on Sunday afternoon we were driving home and Lorna and I were kind of burbling to each other on how good it felt to do something for the community and to volunteer and to be a part of other things. And Ben from the back seat was about 12 years old. He reached over and put his arms around the two of us. He said, "Dad, Mom, the 60s are over." And indeed they were. So that leads me to my second quote from Gone with the Wind. "Frankly, Scarlett, I don't give a damn." In our group, we were beginning to see the fallout from the mass transformational workshops. People had had real and profound emotional experiences that were interpreted as breakthroughs or as enlightenment rather than as the predictable responses to the pressures that they were put under. Many people told me about being put on stage during these workshops and told to do something outrageous that broke the norms of society, and they'd say, "I'm a little embarrassed." I said, "Yeah, you peed, right?" And they said, "How did you know?" And I said, "Because everybody peed when they were asked to do that." We also saw an increase in the clean-cut but somewhat less idealistic group members, a little more corporate types at this time, groups from the International Church of Christ and others. In the 80s, we also saw an increase in the victims of iatrogenic therapies, therapy cults, and individuals who had seen incompetent therapists who employed unreliable techniques to foster recovered memories of satanic ritual abuse and supposedly forgotten sexual abuse. Mind you, I'm not saying that ritual abuse and sexual abuse don't exist. Perhaps 1/3 of the women in our group over the years have been sexually abused by their cult leaders. But there's often a different quality to the memories of those who are victims of false memory syndrome. We started getting calls in the late 80s. An individual would tell us of having recovered memories of satanic abuse. And the caller would go on and tell about these things, and then stop in the middle of the narrative and say, "You believe me, don't you?" We would respond with anything other than outright, unequivocal endorsement of the veracity of this stranger's story. They would invariably become furious and hang up. It became clear to us that the goal of the caller was to be believed rather than to understand and heal. The 80s also saw a flourishing of other support groups for former cultists, mostly nurtured by Focus from the Authentic Can, and Refocus, sponsored by AFF, and Carol and Noel were involved. What was the most positive thing about these groups is that they were often led by the former cultists themselves, a trend which has continued, thank God, and continues to today. Friends and colleagues in the 80s started asking us the question that we've heard only a million times since then. Are the cults still around? In the 90s, we saw a trend in our group towards the fallout from the health-related groups, 12-step programs gone awry, and therapy cults. We saw people who had grown up in cults and left in their late adolescence. Sometimes they got to us right away, but much more often they floundered for a decade or so until they came across a book in a bookstore or found the AFF website, and they were now ready to deal with the cult aftermath of issues that they had been suppressing for years. The age of the group got into the middle to late 30s. Their struggle for redefinition and to clarify issues gives me my 90s presidential quote, "It depends what your definition of is." And the fact that some of the cults we dealt with were modeled on 12-step Overeaters Anonymous groups leads me to a torturous path to my final Gone with the Wind quote, which doesn't really fit, but the segue sort of makes it fit. "I'll never be hungry again." Today, our group membership continues to change. We used to receive referrals by word of mouth. Now half our referrals come to us through the internet, especially links from AFF's fantastic website. The internet has had a profound impact on cult recruitment and on getting information to people who are contemplating leaving the cults. We're seeing fewer people from large groups and more from smaller, more local groups. In the last few years, I've worked on several occasions with baby boomer parents who had been in cults themselves or who were flower children, had left and gone on with their lives, and whose children were now getting involved in cults. So, to end, I have 3 more quotes for you that summarize where we stand today as we look towards the future. The first is my presidential quote for the 2000s, and that's for those who have left cults, and that is, "Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, you can't fool me again." And my second is an answer to the people who still are asking all the time, are the cults still around? And I answer them with the answer that George Bernard Shaw gave when he was asked if there was as much love in the world when he was a septuagenarian as there was when he was a young man. And he said, yes, but different people are doing it. And my final quote is from a contemporary country rock group. Lorna, do you know the name of this group? No. Actually, that's a good one. Yes, I meant the Dixie. Thank you. I meant the Dixie Chicks. And the answer is, I don't want to get to the end of my life and find out everyone was lying. Finally, I want to end with a public service announcement. AFF, as you know, is a non-sectarian, an organization that doesn't endorse anybody in the political realm, and I certainly would be the last one to do that. So in my absolutely non-controversial, bipartisan way, I just want to remind you that November 2nd is Election Day and urge you to examine the stands of the presidential candidates, see what they stand for, and be sure to get out and vote. For the smart one. Oh, sure.
Bill is willing to respond to questions. So if you have any questions about their experience with their group over the years.
How did you know it was the Dixie Chicks that was put on?
I'm from Texas.
We heard you talking about it online.
Well, it's just about all I talk about. Well, I thank you then for the fact that I was obviously comprehensive. Oh.
Are there any particular groups that you've done? Because as you're running a former members group, so are there any particular cults that more people are coming out of than, say, others? I haven't noticed any former Scientologists coming out as much as
we haven't had any former Scientologists in a while. The reason that I can't answer that, Paul, is that we have a skewed sampling. Right. We're in New Jersey. We get, and it's a snowball effect. If we get somebody from a cult, we tend to get people that come out. So I can't answer that for a trend for the country as a whole. We haven't had people from the large groups in quite a while. We've had some from a small 12-step group in Connecticut that broke up recently. We've had one from a pseudo-therapeutic community that was in New Jersey that had broken up. And we've got quite a few from them, and then individuals from other groups. There's a group in, another group in New Jersey that was a New Age cult that we've gotten some people from. So, but again, it's a skewed sample.
Why do you think the big groups aren't producing former members the way they used to, like Scientology and the Moonies? I don't really see too many former members coming out there.
I'm not sure that they're not, that people aren't coming out.
Well,
go ahead.
Just to answer, I suspect that a lot of the big groups, the ex-members have their own groups because there's a large membership leaving.
Right.
So
Yeah, I think.
Dave, maybe you have a
Yeah, Lauren, I would agree with that. The internet has been a major factor in former members of particular groups sort of communicating with each other I mean, you can go to certain chat rooms and there's a lot of activity. FactNet, for example, is a good example. They have total categories of, like, say, former Bible Speaks or Greater Grace World Outreach. Even my own group. I've just newspaper articles have been done on some of them because there's been so much activity in them. And then there's Maureen and I were talking about it. We know of groups that meet together on their own, like in the summertime in a park somewhere, and they have a yearly gathering. Yeah.
So really, the fact that we haven't seen them in our group is because of the sophistication, and we've moved ahead, and it's really a very positive sign.
They're using the internet to organize their own workshops. Yeah.
So it's not that the large groups are just better at stopping people from leaving.
I don't think
The
so.
cynical view is not,
Right.
I don't think it's valid.
No, I don't think that's the case.
Might these be groups that we can learn from, that we should dialogue with, I wonder?
Yeah, has there been any attempt to
Groups
kind of
like this?
network these groups together to kind of,
Lots and lots of members of the Psi Barber cult have been leaving, especially down in Australia, because we've had the BBC documentary, The Secret Swami, which has not been shown in America, but it's gone worldwide.
Yeah.
And also another Danish documentary called Seduced, was screened earlier in the year. And there is a number of websites of ex-Psi Barber devotees, and there is a coalition. I belong to a coalition of ex-Psi Barber devotees worldwide. So lots of...
I'll bet there's so many groups that we're not aware of like that, and you're suggesting that there be some kind of way of all of this networking is a wonderful.
yeah, because I think there's a benefit. I know in my experience when I got out of Scientology, one of the biggest benefits was coming to an AFF conference and seeing people from different cults tell their story and
Right.
seeing that's the same story, you know.
Sure.
And because if I just met with other former Scientologists, which I had done, okay, so now all the former Scientologists made the same stupid mistake, and we all fell for the same scam. Okay, so we're just a group of just weird people on our own. But then you see, well, the Jehovah's Witnesses had the same thing, and former Moonies had the same, and then suddenly you start getting a much better understanding of how it's not a unique, what happened to me is not unique to Scientology. It's unique to human nature. And
Sure.
And you develop that understanding when you network with these other people from other groups. So I think there's a benefit in not keeping the former members from a certain group totally isolated.
It's something that we see in our group every time we meet, that people from therapy cults, religious cults, New Age cults, more scientific cults, mass transformational workshops come together, and they say exactly what you said. The same thing happened to me, but we had different words for it. And I never thought I'd be able to relate to somebody from a religious cult, but here I hear that your experience is exactly the same. And when I counsel parents, and I'm sure that others have had the same experience, when they say to me, have you heard of this group? And sometimes I'll say yes and sometimes no, but I'll say, you know, I don't have to have heard of this group. I know this group. I know the leader. I know what happened. It's not because I'm arrogant. It's because the fact is that the commonalities of the techniques that are used are the same, even if the words that they use are different.
We have dialogued with Reveal, which is the largest organization for former members of the International Churches of Christ. And I always put their website up at the end of my lectures because when I'm doing campus lectures, that's the cult that most college students are familiar with. And Carol, haven't you had some dialogue with Reveal?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I just want to say I facilitate a group for former cult members in Mill Valley, California, just north of San Francisco. People come from all over the Bay Area. So just to let people know if anyone's interested, they can contact me.
That's great. And if you get on the AFF website, on Refocus, they'll have a list of groups that we're familiar with of former cult members all over the country.
I think that the internet, one advantage of it is that it gives a safe way to take a first step when it comes to recovery that wasn't available before, because many people aren't ready to do something like go to your house. It would be like way too much for them. But the internet provides a very safe first step where they can start reaching out and finding others and not feeling in such isolation. Yeah.
Since Madonna joined, have you noticed an outpouring of Kabbalists?
No, we have not had anybody from the Kabbalah in our group. But we're waiting. Yes.
exiting columnists.
They're probably too new.
It says there's one or two main message boards that they use, and a lot of times it's the apologists from
Right,
this group I'm referring to as apologists.
right.
I gotta go.
That's where a lot of the apologists come from. I think there's just main ones where
Are there links on the ASF site that would link to some of these sites?
Absolutely.
I have a list of probably about 50 of them on my computer for different ex-member groups.
What is the frequency of your group and
Monthly.
the format?
It meets monthly. We begin with informal time, people just talk informally, which is just as important as the formal part of the group. We then go around the group. I usually begin by reminding them of the ground rules, which are very simple. This is a group of former cult members. We're here to talk about the experience of being a former cult member. We're not here to take a political stance or to do social action. Well, I am, but the group is. And that everything that's said in the group is confidential. Then we go around the room and everybody introduces themselves, say what group they were in, how long they're out, and what's on their mind this particular month that they want to bring up. And from that, we do that just because it breaks the ice. Then it just seems with a group that once somebody said something, they feel more comfortable jumping in rather than having it just free-flowing, anybody say anything they want. There's more shy people might not speak then. So they've broken the ice, and then we leave it up to them, and we go anywhere they want to go.
How long does it go each month?
It's 2.5 hours.
One of the things that I've found, I do nothing but sexual molestation litigation in a cult context. But one of the things that we have found who practice in this realm, lawyers, is we kind of some of us who do this type of litigation across the country kind of made a pact with each other that we would, when we got press, that we would provide to the people who are in front of us for a specific fact scenario, that we would provide the web addresses for the others and the information that's available there. So one of the things that I think has been real effective for that group of people who are addressing that specific issue is having a two-page document, especially with the information, as you said, that's out there on the internet. We have a two-page document that lists all these resources for information about that specific realm, and every time we're in front of the press, we make sure they get that. That they're not going to let us say it on the evening news, come see all these web addresses. But if we give them to them, a lot of times they'll run some segment of it, or they'll contact somebody who's on that web address to get more information in that realm. And by doing so, it lends authenticity to what we're saying on the spot. Here are all these organizations that deal with the same realm, but it also just pulls together a lot of information that otherwise they wouldn't have access to. So that would work equally as well in the global cult context, to have that information, to get it in front of the press every time there's a specific fact scenario that becomes press-worthy from the press's standpoint.
Bill, thank you. As always, it was informative and entertaining. I want to, yes. I want to be sure that you have a couple of minutes to go downstairs, and I'm thrilled that Elizabeth came back into the room, because I want to suggest, based on what I've been observing, that if you will leave kind of single file and walk by her seat, she will say bye-bye to each of you. She will hold up her brownie to you and say, want some? Thank you. Sessions begin at 2 o'clock.